evening. I've got the task of running one of the last sessions today. There is a bit less attendance in the room, but we are more than 3,000 online, thanks to the technology. So we look at the trends for 2022, and in particular, we all expect some more beneficial years after 2 years that have been unpredictable or difficult, to say the least. And a lot is on the shoulders of the infrastructure sector. And the task today during this session will be to look at what we can expect, what is the outlook. Together today with me, I will be in particular with William Ross, who is Assistant Secretary for Multilateral Affairs, Trade and Development Policies Department and co-chairman the Paris Club at the French Treasury. We'll be also on stage with Christophe Dossard, Chief Executive Officer, Sustainable Infrastructure Foundation, SIF, Source, who manages the MDB platform Source, so we'll know more about this. And we'll have also online, she's already with us, Manal Fouad, Chief of Public Financial Management Division at the IMF. Thank you and welcome. I think we also have Michael Ridley, who is supposed to join.
How do you do?
Hello? Hi, Michael. Sorry. So I wasn't sure you were connected. So Michael is Director Responsible Investments at HSBC and will also intervene today with us. So the first question that I have is probably for you, Manal, after those turbulence during the last 2 years, 1 year and a half. It would be interesting to have some more explanation on how you see at the IMF the current context and how infrastructure can be beneficial for helping governance, but also recovery plans. So would be extremely kind if you could give us some thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, so greetings from Washington. Sorry I can't be with you in person in Paris, but I guess this is good for our carbon footprint. So as we are approaching 2 years into the global pandemic and its consequences, our focus in the next month and year at the IMF will continue to be on how to enable the recovery in the context of heightened debt, high inequality in vaccine access, and long-term development needs. We believe the recovery should be green and inclusive, transforming the economies towards more resilience to combat climate change and its impact. And infrastructure investment will be critical for an inclusive, green, and resilient recovery in the medium term, and for countries to be able to meet their Paris Accords and sustainable development goals in the medium term. In the longer term as well. Public investment will be an essential component of countries' efforts to rebuild their economies after COVID-19 pandemic. There are many areas where investment is needed, whether in the health sector, transportation, digital platforms, and many other priority areas. So to answer your question, Boris, what's the current context in 2022 and now and beyond? Of course, we are still in the midst of large uncertainties, but what we know is that first, the pandemic has resulted in a one-off but lasting increase in global debt levels and reduced the available fiscal space for countries. Debt levels are now at historical highs. The pandemic has also resulted in a strong reduction in tax revenues. And this, combined with the need to address the health emergency, has unfortunately caused cuts in investment in low-income and emerging markets and derailed efforts to meet the SDGs. The reduction in debt levels and return to pre-COVID revenue levels will rely on growth and a strong recovery. And this is where we know investment can help. It will help create jobs, infrastructure for more inclusive societies, help achieve long-term development goals. Increasing public investment has a very strong impact on employment, creating millions of jobs and growth. And green and resilient investment is particularly powerful. According to our World Economic Outlook last year, a stimulus package that includes both large infrastructure investment and complementary mitigation policy measures could boost global employment by 12 million jobs on average each year for the next 7 years. In addition, many jobs in renewable energy generation and energy efficiency improvements are more job intensive than fossil fuel-based electricity generations, and importantly, require low-skilled workers which can benefit everyone in society. Finally, in times of uncertainty like now, green public investment boosts confidence and promotes private investment with large multiplier effects. In the long term, the benefits of green and resilient infrastructure investment combined with other mitigation policies are expected to grow due to reduced climate damages. But while green and resilient infrastructure is key to achieving SDGs and the Paris Agreement and also to help with the recovery, the economic and social outcomes of public investment depends crucially on the efficiency of public investment management and infrastructure governance. The shrinking fiscal space and the realization that public investment will play a significant role in post-pandemic recovery may foster myopic decision-making in project selection. So governments really need to couple infrastructure investment with improvements in public investment management. Our research at the IMF shows that countries can lose up to 1/3 of their public investment spending due to inefficiencies in the public investment management institution. And this loss could reach over 50% in low-income countries. That means that for every dollar spent, half would go to waste. But strong public investment management institution, that is, the frameworks that effectively plan, allocate, and implement public investment can help countries close up to 2/3 of their efficiency gap. And this is key in the context of large financing needs, lack of fiscal space, and high debt. Countries simply cannot afford to dwindle scarce resources. This is also fully in line with the quality infrastructure agenda adopted by the G20. So it's important to make sure that financial resources are put into something that delivers the expected results and increases social welfare. So in the aftermath of the global pandemic, for instance, project selection will be key in the coming period. Infrastructure plans that made sense 2 years ago may no longer work. Demand may have gone down, construction costs may have gone up, health requirements may have changed, and this will require another closer look at the investment pipelines to make possible changes to the prioritization and phasing of projects, accelerating some, deferring or canceling others. And all the investment programs should be also reflected in transparent and medium-term budget decisions. Scarce public financial resources can also be used strategically and wisely to leverage private sector investment, innovative financing instruments, as well as international climate funds. But while the private sector will be called to play an important role, government should make sure to avoid increasing their fiscal exposure, hidden fiscal costs, and contingent liabilities that will exacerbate their debt levels. The global experience with public-private partnerships presents plenty of cases where PPPs helped build the right infrastructure and deliver needed services in an efficient way. But at the same time, the global experience presents plenty of cases where misperceptions of PPP fiscal risks have induced governments to approve inefficient projects. So while reviewing project appraisals and revisiting the public investment plans, focus on maintenance and capital repairs and retrofitting buildings can also be very productive and should play important roles in the post-crisis recovery. Going back to climate change, we believe it should be fully incorporated in all aspects of infrastructure investment, management, and governance. Climate change is a macro-critical issue and will have strong impacts on countries' economic and fiscal policies. Incorporating climate change in public investment management will contribute to improving its efficiency. For instance, climate smart public investment management helps avoid investing in infrastructure assets that may be stranded in the future and adapt project selection and prioritization process to account for climate disaster risks to ensure that resources are well spent again and achieve their intended economic outcomes. So how can the IMF help? First, the IMF has increased significantly its financial support to countries through existing and emergency financing facilities, including the new SDR allocations. The IMF can also be a convening power to help unlock access to climate funds for small and fragile states. A recent paper we published shows that small states and the small island states have huge adaptation needs, and access to climate funds has been challenging and needs to be significantly stepped up for countries to meet their existential challenges. The IMF can also help countries spend better with the available funding through our diagnostic tools and capacity development activities. So our PIMA investment management assessment tool, the PIMA, has now been applied in over 65 countries. And this assessment helps countries identify their strengths and weaknesses and develop action plans to address the main weaknesses in public investment management. We're also developing a new climate module to the PIMA and making it available to countries in 2022, and this will be an important part of our activities. We also have the PFRAM, which is a tool that assesses the fiscal cost of PPP projects and has been implemented in many countries. And we have an infrastructure governance portal that I would invite you to look at, which we will continue to expand to include more results from PIMA results and also guidance and analytical work to help with infrastructure governance. And finally, we'll continue to support the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Actions, as well as the G20 Infrastructure Working Group with the Indonesia presidency, like we did with Italy, the Saudis, and Japan. So let me stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manal, and you make a perfect transition because our next speaker is indeed going to cover the priorities of the past and future presidencies of the G20. Christophe, I would like to ask you to give us some elements on those priorities, if you can. Especially regarding infrastructure, of course.
Yes, of course. And thank you. And so what I will do is I will do it on what we do from a source perspective, the MDB platform that I'm leading. First of all, why source? So there is no lack of financing available globally for infrastructure, and we can see with the success of Infraweek every year that is increasing. So there is a lot of capital out there. The problem is the lack of well-prepared project, and that is something that we can see in many jurisdictions, whether it's developed, emerging, or in developing countries. So the first reason why Source was created is to address that gap of well-prepared project through an IT platform, and the second is mainly related also to the event today is digitalization. Governments more and more will need to work from home in order to be able to face different crises, and we have seen that with the COVID. And there is also a need to have more and more digital tools. As Manal also mentioned, there are different tools that have been created in multilateral organizations. So the path towards digitalization is very important. So what is Source? As I said, IT platform, different functionalities for governments to communicate. There is a lack of communication between different ministries, transport, planning, budget, finance. They do not communicate well. It's also a global issue. And also how to have a common language between the public sector and the private sector. So basically it became a project management tool that we have developed with the MDBs, and they are making this platform available for free to their member countries. So this is what we do globally, is that we implement this IT solution in the MDB developing member countries, and our governance is exclusively composed of MDBs. So there is no country influencing what we do, but it's only a multilateral governance. And this is the part that is related to the G20 presidency that we have seen. So we are a member of the Infrastructure Working Group, and the priorities for Italy have been, in terms of infrastructure, on resilience and maintenance, inclusion, sustainable infrastructure, and digitalization. And it's true that there are three priorities that we have implemented through SOURCE, so resilience and maintenance. Different compendiums have been created during the presidency that have been very important, and this is the type of knowledge that we will integrate into the platform, so when governments are preparing their projects, they will be able to access that knowledge at the right juncture and at the right time. In terms of digitalization, this is what we do on a day-to-day basis, is that we work with different governments globally, with the presidencies of different countries, from South Africa to Panama, Brazil, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Philippines, Indonesia, etc. So there are today 40 countries that are waiting for SOURCE to be implemented. And lastly, the sustainable infrastructure. We are lucky to work with the MDBs, and the MDBs have created an infrastructure cooperation platform that is basically composed of all the MDBs to be better coordinated on different G20 issues. And they have created the sustainable infrastructure indicators that are actually a compendium or harmonization of different methodologies that the MDBs are using. And this is the type of methodology that we integrate into SOURCE in order to make it available to different member countries. So there is a high link between what we do and how we can deliver better what is produced also inside the different G20 presidencies, such as the QII principles or the G20 project preparation principles. And for Indonesia, they will continue on different items of the Italian presidency, and we will, of course, be there with the MDBs to support the agenda of the presidency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the G20 priorities, this fits perfectly with the tool that you've been developing for those years. Is this tool something that has been overlooked or followed by the G20 over years, or is this a recent trend from the G20 to be fully involved?
I would
following those progress.
Yeah, I think there is progress. It's basically we have now 7 countries that are part of the G20 that will use the platform, and it will grow over time. I think what is always difficult is to ask in a panel when you have 10 minutes to explain how works a software and infrastructure gaps.
We'll come back to this.
Exactly. So this is quite difficult to be able to go into details. But yes, I think there are a more understanding on the importance to have data to be systematically collected by governments in order to be better positioned to assess the pipeline of infrastructure they are managing from different point of views. And that is something that many governments are lacking, is to be able to control and collect their own data and to make better informed decisions. And this is where we can support them. We are not for profit, and we work for the MDBs for that purpose.
Okay, thank you. So if we come to the fast infra first deliverable, I would like to hand over to you, William. William Ross, can you give us a few words as an introduction to this tool and how does it work? And then I think we'll go into more details with Michael and Christophe again.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. Before going into the introduction for Fast Infra, perhaps just to come back to what our colleague from IMF said, I think first we have the assessment that there is an infrastructure gap, and the question is what is missing? You have the financing part, and Christophe, you said that in some areas perhaps there is a financing gap, but clearly the initiative like Fast Infra is trying to address things in a different ways, looking at the sustainability of infrastructure and how to attract private finance how to attract private finance, how to label infrastructure projects in order to give confidence to investors that it is an infrastructure with the best standards regarding quality and notably for sustainability, in a sustainability view, impact on climate, etc. In a way, what I've seen when I discuss with G20 colleagues, when we prepare G20 communiqué, we are used to talk a lot about, some specific sentences in a communiqué. Not a lot of time. We have taken a lot of time talking about the QII indicator, quality infrastructure investment. And I think with Fast Infra, the idea is to look at what could we do concretely. And of course, in the current context, we are still in the pandemic crisis, but we are working for the recovery, and we can see the recovery now. It is much more important to be sure that the infrastructure we will build, that the private sector will be sustainable. So in 2019, in a way, in parallel with the G20 discussion regarding QII, and in the margin of the One Planet Summit, there was this idea to launch a label. And it comes from the One Planet Lab, which is the think tank of the One Planet Summit. It comes from there was an impulse at the highest level. Our French president was active on that, and the idea was to create a dedicated new asset class with the label, ensuring investor that the infrastructure will follow the best standards regarding sustainability, acceleration of the transition, in order to attract financing. So that's the context. My second point is the fact that Fast Infra, it's a high level of ambition. And they are trying to address the quality issue, I could say, in a neutral way, because what I've seen also at the G20 level, it becomes always very political, geopolitical, this question about quality of infrastructure. And I think the fact that Fast Infra has been able to look at it from a neutral way, gathering private sector, MDBs, also I think your model, to avoid political too many political tensions is a way to ensure the implementation of this ambition. And finally, and I will stop with that, a label is good, but what is important is a label to be used. And I think it's also part of the ongoing success of Fast Infra. It's to work not only about the label itself, but also about looking at pilot projects, about concrete examples in the energy sector, for example, how to use this label.
Okay, thanks. That makes, again, a good transition to Michael, who is going to present what is the label. Michael, are you connected? Can you hear us?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Gregory.
Thanks.
And it's a great honor to be speaking at the Paris Infraweek. And apologies, I'm not there in person. And it's also a great honor to follow the French Treasury, and we're delighted for your words about Fast Infra. So just to explain, Fast Infra, as you may have heard, has been thinking for the last year and a half what's been stopping the flow of private finance into sustainable infrastructure. And the 5 original partners involved were the HSBC, the OECD, IFC, the Global Infrastructure Facility, and the CPI. In May of 2020, May of last year, we had 2 global calls. Professor Lord Nick Stern spoke on both, and we had the French government represented. And post those successful calls, we broadened Fast Infra to include about 80 or 90 organizations. So it's open and inclusive, public and private sector. And there are banks, asset managers, MDBs, NDBs, rating agencies, NGOs involved, etc. And the group of 80 or 90 organizations were sort of coalesced around 4 initiatives. The top 2, the label and the platform, are sort of globally transformative and globally applicable. And the latter 2, what we call GREG and OMCBP, are, we think, focused on the emerging markets and aim to de-risk. But in terms of the label, which I guess is the key initiative we're taking to Glasgow 1st of November, the idea there is to get the focus of host governments and developers at pre-construction phase on environmental and resiliency standards. because they need to do that to get the label. The conversation will move rapidly to that at pre-construction phase. And then post-construction phase, it will offer a sort of cover or endorsement of those in institutional markets who'd like to fund sustainable infrastructure but need an external validation that indeed this asset that they're going to fund through equity or loans or fixed income is sustainable. So that's the idea behind the Fast Infra label. Now, a lot of work's been done on developing it, and effectively there are 14 criteria under 4 dimensions. And the 4 dimensions are environmental, social, governance, and resiliency. What one needs to do as an asset owner is consider one's asset against these 14 criteria, which are under the 4 dimensions, and achieve a baseline against all 14. And there's also an ask of getting a stretch or a performance against one or more of the 14 criteria. But the baseline, a lot of that is leaning on work from the IFC performance standards, but the criteria go broader and a little bit beyond that. A lot of work's been done by Macquarie and the Global Infrastructure Facility on the nuts and bolts of the criteria to bring the label together. We've had a working group that's had 6 working group meetings, and then we have had a public consultation process, which has just ended, and we got 160 comments, a third of which were from the private sector. So we're fairly confident that the label can be launched before Glasgow, COP26, and then it will play a key role in directing capital. I should say that it was kind of, the idea was to sort of be inspired by the Green Bond Principles. The Green Bond Principles is a 4-page document that we think accelerated the flow of money in the green bond market. It has private sector buy-in, but also it's used by the private sector, but is accepted by the public sector. That's the goal here. We have done a lot of thinking about the data that will accompany the projects. We are expecting that asset owners will say that self-declare that their assets are sustainable against the Fast Infra documentation. There will probably be some verification of that, a bit like the green bond market. Verification market may develop as a sort of cottage industry, but asset owners will be invited to self-declare against the criteria. They can ask for a verification arm's length if they would like, and that data then needs to be readily available to the market. So we have been talking to data providers to make that data available, and it will also be available through the data platform, which my colleague Christophe at Source, I think, is going to talk about. So that's where we are. Expect to hear more about the label because there will be an announcement coming up to COP. We're looking for endorsements and adaptation, and thank you so much for the positive words from the French Ministry. We really appreciate that.
Thanks very much, Michael. This is indeed a very critical question, as we have seen in the recent press over difficulties with ESG criteria and standard, and is probably something that is also at the heart of the energy transition capacity really to be mobilized, because if there is no label clearly that is acceptable and accepted by everyone, it's going to be a bit more difficult. So will be very interesting to see the developments, as you said. Christophe, would you like to add a few words on the platform itself and on Fast Infra, maybe?
Yes, of course. And I think one aspect that is very key, as William said, is that it's good to have a label, methodologies, but they have to be used. And the dissemination is very difficult because you need to have governments to use it, or at least I will speak on behalf of how we see the label for governments to use it. And in order to achieve that, Fast Infra second big initiative was to create a tech-enabled platform, and that would be making sure that there is the whole infrastructure life cycle to be covered. And for example, as a user story, you are a lender that could deploy more capital to finance sustainable infrastructure, but the lender would need much bigger teams to source projects, analyze their documentation, and close transactions at scale. In order to do that, it's going to redesign the way all stakeholders cooperate and how data is shared within the value chain. And the Fast Infra platform, basically the second initiative, is to simplify origination, due diligence, and closing in such a way that capital will be faster allocated where it is most needed. So what we have been working with different initiatives on this stage of digital tools is to be able to come together and to see how we could connect the dots. So for example, on the way that Source is being designed, used by governments to prepare their projects, like a project management tool, digitalizing the label into Source, so then they can go through the projects and have their projects, have the label against their projects that are being prepared. When it is standard, is to have the data to flow to the different platforms or tools that are being connected. And we are 7 in the working group from EPPF, Infraclear, IBM, Liquidnet, and us, and Scale, in order to have this platform to facilitate the flow of information from the beginning to the end. And of course, it's going to take time to arrive to harmonization, standardization. However, we can start from somewhere at the beginning with the pre-origination, making sure that projects are well prepared, following the label. And once you collect data, you can measure. And when you can measure, you can make changes. It's not from me, but it's all about data. And that is actually something that Fast Infra has thought about. And the good news regarding the platform and the label is that today we have several countries that are using Source. South Africa, the presidency, Brazil, Ecuador, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan that will have projects published against the label for COP26, not only to show that the label is being used, but also how governments are using them, what is the feedback from the private sector, but also to show the beginning, practically speaking, of the tech-enabled platform from Fast Infra. So this is something that we will, of course, communicate for COP26, but governments are already committed to address this presentation of pilots for COP26 at the presidency level for South Africa, and in Brazil through the Banco de Desarrollo de Minas Gerais, Development Bank of Minas Gerais. So that will be actually very practical examples at a high level in order to show how to implement the label, how to use it at scale, but also how to have the beginning of the tech-enabled platform to be practically used.
Thank you very much for this. I would suggest anyone to go on the website to have some more informative products, as we do not have slides to display or anything. I think it would be practical to showcase and to look at the website to have some more info on this and find your way, especially on the 6 countries that you mentioned. Also, see how this has been collected. That would be probably very profitable. I think that in the news we have the Paris Summit on the financing of African economies, and this is recent. And I would like to ask you, William, to give us some thoughts about the operationalization of this summit and how you see things coming up now, especially as Africa is at the heart of the recovery plans. In a number of ways, sanitary speaking, but also in terms of infrastructure and various needs that we covered today during the day.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, when we prepared the summit for financing African economies, which took place the 18th of May in Paris, we had in mind first the risk of great divergence, a concept highlighted by many international organizations, including IMF, due to the crisis and the difference between countries, between regions, regarding the ability to mobilize macroeconomic tools, monetary policy, fiscal policy, etc. We have been warned by many institutions that there is a risk of great divergence, and notably Africa compared to other regions. So collectively, not only France, but we worked a lot with European colleagues, G7, G20 colleagues, and very important African colleagues. we try to cover all the aspects of the financing needs of African economies. So we had a first work stream dedicated to the macro financial view. We talked about SDRs, we talked about debt vulnerabilities, debt treatment, we talked about how to provide new financing through by IMF, by MDBs, how to mobilize private financing, what are the tools which could be used, and also in parallel, what are the reforms expected to improve in African economies the management, the public management of public finances. So this was the first work stream. The second work stream was dedicated on a business environment, how to promote, to support entrepreneurship, where are the market failure regarding financing new entrepreneurs, and how African countries could improve the business environment and to give to increase attractiveness for private investors. And the third work stream was infrastructure. And we took some time to look at that and trying to find a way to complement what is already done at the G20 level or in other platforms. And the assessment was also clear that yes, there are some financing gap, but we decided to focus on the project preparation and on the evaluation. First, regarding evaluation, we looked at what exists, and we thought that what is missing. We have a lot of discussion about label, indicators, etc. But we would like a self-assessment by African government, African institutions regarding the projects they are building in their countries. So we discussed with many different African and international institutions in order to find a way to promote a self-assessment by African economies. And at the end, we discussed about that with the African Union, AUDA NEPAD, and we saw an opportunity to develop a self-assessment based on the different indicators produced at the G20 level or with Fast Infra or over label. So at the end of the 18th of May, it was, I could say, only a declaration, a communiqué. But what is important that it's not only a communiqué signed by G20 countries, or we invited also, and they signed also many African leaders. And we are working on trying to have a pilot with one country committed in a way to do this self-assessment with the support of AUDA NEPAD. So that's the first delivery.
We know who would be the leader already?
We have some ideas, but they are ongoing discussion. I think South Africa, indeed, we will see with them. It is their decision, but they are well advanced in the project preparation phase. So I think it could be one of the good candidates. And the second part within the infrastructure work stream was to how to support project preparation. And clearly, we were convinced by the source proposal, but more broadly by any software who could promote a good preparation and to give countries, to give institutions the right approach, the different steps to be followed in order to prepare and develop a project. And so we, at this stage, for the summit, it was, I could say, only a declaration, but with a clear promotion of software like Source. And we think that it has paved the way for AUDA NEPAD to have a partnership with the Source, with Source, in order to facilitate and to promote the use of Source in many African countries. So I'm sure that it's not the only reason why you have signed this partnership, Christophe, with Audanepad, but we hope that this summit was one of the leverage to facilitate that.
Thank you. So this is clearly a trend for 2022, and will probably grow up, enable a source also to maybe move even more quickly if a number of nations are leading the way. I would like to ask you both, how do you see the impact of the infrastructure sector on the economic recovery in Africa? In a number of nations, we've seen a number of recovery plans if we name the EU and France in particular, with very significant amounts. Did we manage to mobilize the same amounts in the infrastructure as probably we've done for EU and France? Or was this discussed, and are there any ideas in this respect? William, peut-être.
Yeah, I can begin. Clearly, infrastructure, investment and specifically infrastructure is in the roadmap for the recovery for France and for the EU. We have a national recovery plan. There is also an EU, a very large EU recovery plan with solidarity among EU members. So clearly, it has been identified as a key tool for the recovery, with the caveat that we want a sustainable infrastructure. So clearly, it is not just to incentivize. I think it is a precondition. At political level, there is a clear message that we want a green recovery. And that's why I think all you have discussed regarding what is sustainable infrastructure, how to avoid greenwashing, how to be sure that it works, how to mobilize, to attract private money, public money. It is clearly part of the French and EU agenda.
So that means that it's, for instance, on the agenda for the French presidency of the European Union, for instance?
Yes, for sure, and we will have also thinking about not only Europe but also Africa. The European Council is working with the African Union to prepare the EU-Africa Summit, and I'm sure that concrete deliverables will be looked for, including in the infrastructure side, in order to fill the infrastructure gap, but in a sustainable manner.
Christophe, yes.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the African context, it would be better to ask Audanepad or the African Development Bank. What I can say is that what I see with Audanepad, they are implementing tools such as the service delivery mechanism in order to support governments on preparing their projects, or the PIDA quality label that is actually been developed in order to have quality infrastructure projects. And also, if you look at the African Development Bank, they have the NEPAD IPPF, which is a project preparation facility, or the Infrastructure Consortium for Africa with different tools. So what we see is definitely there is the same mobilization happening everywhere in terms of prioritizing infrastructure development, and this is also why the Minister of Mauritania is also there. So I think there is the same mobilization is everywhere. I think the COVID just emphasized the need to have more digital tools to support the recovery, but the tools are already there and they are being promoted, they are being scaled up. And having the African Summit has happened on May 18th is important in order to highlight what is happening and how we can work together, because alone it's not possible to be able to achieve it. And we know that infrastructure is a major tool in order to support countries on a recovery plan, and that will definitely enable to also have different principles implemented. So therefore, to have sustainable infrastructure developed, which is the most important aspect.
Maybe one last question. You touched upon this a little bit, but and it's a question also for you, Manal, Michael, Christophe or William, we've seen a development of a number of bonds with a sustainable focus to finance infrastructure. And one question that I had for any of you who would like to respond is, would you see the development of the issuance of bonds with ESG criteria in the next future for Africa? Because we've not seen that many on the continent regarding infrastructure, and Africa with probably an ESG or green focus.
Question for Michael.
Sure, I can respond to that. So
Thanks,
HSBC, can you hear me? HSBC Asset Management does run something called REGIO, the Real Economy Green Investment Opportunities Fund, which is a $580 million EM green bond fund. And the idea is that that should buy high quality emerging market green bond corporates. Initially, the fund runs with about 28% green, and so it's a net seller of non-green and a buyer of green going forwards. But the fund is very motivated to be a buyer of high quality EM green bond issuance, and to interface with issuers who maybe are not thinking that there's a reason to issue a green bond. If we get on the phone and say, actually, the fund exists, it's interested in high quality emerging market corporate green bonds, they might be motivated to issue a green bond when, otherwise they wouldn't. But moving forward in Africa is a challenge because of the size of the deals is medium to small, and a lot of the initial focus of foreign investment is around minerals, et cetera, but there is desire to, with the REGIO Fund, help build capital markets in this part of the world and build a sustainable capital markets and a green capital markets. And it's probably the green and social bonds both could be issued. So certainly something that's interesting and we are pursuing as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So something probably to watch after 2022 and beyond. I was very pleased to have this panel with the four of you, especially because we look at the future and we want the future to be bright. And I just would like to say that we've published an annual barometer on infra with CF News at Bird and Bird, and we will update this. And this session and the sessions today that were organized by Paris Europlace will also enable us to develop this barometer that we publish annually on infrastructure. I would like to thank you very much, Manal, Michael, Christophe, and William. And I think we are just in time for the next session, which is not a session, but a prize delivery. Thank you very much, everyone.